Wow, what a privilege it was to have Matthew Gardner, Chief Economist for Windermere, come on the Think Bigger Real Estate Show today. One thing that I would encourage you to listen for as you listen to this episode is really three things. Number one, I want you to think about what he said about the industries that are going to be most impacted. Notice he did not say residential real estate in there. In fact, he said just the opposite. He said residential real estate is going to help pull the economy out of this. I think that's important for your mindset. So listen to that, internalize what he's saying, because it ought to give you a lot of confidence to go forward. He also gives later on in the episode some very specific tactical advice as to what you can do to capture the upside. As we have this recovery, as we move through this, residential real estate agents that do these things that he mentions are going to be more inclined and better equipped, better set up to take advantage of what's coming. So I'm excited for you to listen to this episode. Again, Matthew Gardner is somebody who's highly respected. We'll be speaking on the Inman Connect stages here in a very short period of time, which is one of the most highly coveted places where industry thought leaders go to speak and teach. So excited, again, for you to listen to this episode and for you to really internalize what Matthew Gardner, this fabulous economist, shares with all of us. Enjoy. Hey, I'd like to welcome you back to the Think Bigger Real Estate Show. I'm very excited today to have with me a guest who's been probably more popular than maybe he even wanted to be. He's the chief economist for Windermere. He just does a fabulous job. I know he's got fans all over the country now, and people really tuning in to hear what's happening economically and what can we expect moving forward. So I want to thank Matthew Gardner for coming on today to the Think Bigger Real Estate Show to inspire and help us, again, to build a business without sacrificing everything else. So thank you, Matthew, for being here.
You're welcome, Justin. Pleasure to be here.
Yes. I know that, again, for those that watch the show regularly, that tune in, know that oftentimes I'll kind of go down the path of mindset. I don't always go down the path of kind of the economic side of things. So this is really exciting for me to have somebody here that can really ground a lot of the things that people should be thinking and feeling, right? And so I believe in numbers, but I believe that there are people that know them and do them better than I do. And so I'm excited to have you here and kind of really be able to interpret what we're seeing and how we can really move in a way that keeps us hopefully above the fray and moving forward despite what happens to the economy, right? We can't always control the global, national, state, community economies, but we can't always control our personal economy. And so I'm hoping to get from this today some insight, some grounding for you that we can educate other people, yet keep our mindsets in such a space that we can really get the very best activity for ourselves moving forward. So thank you again for coming on today. Let's go ahead and dive in here. Obviously, we've got some stats that I've actually pulled from you. And for those that don't currently follow you, let's start off by kind of sharing that. What, Matthew, for you, how do people contact you, follow you? How do they find your broadcasts?
Oh, okay. Best way, depending on which interface you're using. For Facebook, for example, go to Windermere Economics. Okay. It's a way. You can certainly find me on that. However, the trouble is with Facebook, they max you out at 5,000 friends. So I'm afraid I can't take any more friends, but feel free to follow me there as well. And on Instagram, it's Matthew Gardner Econ. And those are the two major ones. And LinkedIn, Matthew Gardner.
Okay, perfect. I love that. For those that can't tune in the entire episode, please go find Matthew. He does a fantastic job. So again, let's get into this a little bit. Right now, we've got 30% of the nation's businesses are closed right now. Obviously, this is a little bit of a kind of an artificial market, right? Because it's very tied to the current pandemic. What would be your predictions, Matthew, moving forward? How many of those businesses are going to come back, would you expect? And how many are really going to probably be out of business permanently?
I think you have to look at the makeup of the businesses which have been shuttered. Obviously, since early part of April, in fact, in some respects, a few weeks earlier than that, in essence, we turned a significant part of the economy off. Well, it's almost as if a light switch got turned off because we had shelter in place. It was implemented. It started being implemented in California and then spread out across the country. But when you start thinking about the businesses that have been shuttered, who are they? Well, in essence, it hit two distinct components of the economy far harder than any other. The first one, leisure and hospitality, hotels, bars, restaurants, and that's one job in 9 in America is involved in that industry. They were, in essence, shut down. And then additional to that was retail. That's one job in 10 in the country. So when you combine those two things, it's very, very significant in terms of overall number of businesses closing. And therefore, that's obviously pushed the unemployment rate, which I'm sure we all talk about. When it comes to who will survive and who will not, I think retail is fascinating because I think it's very much split. We've already started to see some of the larger retail entities filing bankruptcy. You obviously heard Neiman Marcus and several others have gone under this year. A sad indictment, but that was going to happen, quite frankly, anyway. But when you think about it, where my biggest concern is, it's in the bar and the restaurant world. Margins are very, very tight, automatically anyway. And I would not be surprised, certainly when it comes to restaurants, that if America doesn't lose probably close to 1/3 of them, that will never reopen again. So that is going to be very, very significant. Now, for those that will reopen, it's going to look very different. You're going to have far fewer tables, more spacing, obviously social distancing. And that means the people that were laid off from those jobs while the restaurants and bars were closed, when they reopen, it's quite likely not all of those employees will come back. And so that's going to be a problem in that world. So I expect that really the pandemic has hit those distinct industry sectors far more than any other, although it's certainly started to flood out into manufacturing, to a degree construction, and actually healthcare. But that's only because clinics and dentist offices rather are closed. They again will reopen, and I've got no worries about them once we actually get the country open back up again.
So with these bars and restaurants going out, do you foresee that an increased trend probably towards takeout, right? If margins are already tight within these businesses, it seems as if having less people be able to come into their place of business could be further detrimental to the business. You're gonna have to get pretty creative, aren't you? If you're a business owner in that space, to be able to keep your margin enough to thrive as a business, yet with these new conditions, that's gonna be a tricky kind of path forward for those industries.
I think it absolutely will, and it's going to hit what's called white tablecloth. So sit-down eateries far more than anything else. I was actually on another call similar to this with the CEO of Mod's Pizza a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying he should be fine because it literally is an in-and-out business. But he did absolutely state that the sit-down restaurants, that's where you're going to find, I think, most of the pain in terms of the number of eateries that won't reopen.
Yeah. So let's move into maybe some of the things that are tied a little bit closer. Of course, those of us that are in the real estate industry, me specifically coming out of the title and escrow industry, and my clients all coming out of mostly residential, some commercial. Obviously, they're wondering how this is going to impact them. Being deemed essential services, right? There's been a little glimmer of hope that they can continue to serve people. And obviously, we've seen housing maybe take a bit of a timeout and a break, but not stop, right? We're even seeing kind of pent-up demand and people now moving more than ever. But really the probably curiosity for everybody here is what's going to happen to the housing market. And maybe let's start before we go there, Matthew. I'd love to hear kind of the commercial market, because I think that obviously will affect people that are invested there. But let's maybe start at the top and then we'll kind of work down more towards the residential side. But from a commercial market, that's probably a big question mark right now. How many people are going to set up camp at home and stay there as opposed to going back to their office buildings and be either renegotiating leases or not renewing them at all?
Yeah. So if you look at the major food groups, and we'll break it down like that, commercial office, certainly we will find fewer people going back. There's no doubt about it. And I think this is actually a trend that was started a few years ago with some of the major commercial companies. When they were renewing their leases, they kept the same amount of brokers, and CBRE was a great example. However, in a significantly smaller footprint. We've seen that over the last several years. But I think it's going to get even smaller. Now, we already know companies like Facebook, like LinkedIn, like Zillow, have basically said to almost all their employees, come back again next January. So, and I think a lot of those people actually will not come back at all. They'll be permanently working from home. So my position on that is that you're going to need more employees to fill the same building than you've ever used to. And so I expect we'll see a significant slowing down in terms of new development. I also think it's what's fascinating is we've actually been getting rid of private offices and going to more of this open format. Maybe that will change. Maybe we're going to go back to the private office scenario, or even if you are in an open office, you're going to see a lot more in terms of glass screens between spots, this kind of thing. So in essence, I think that office demand is going to be slower because, as you said, a lot of people will, maybe not full-time, but at least part-time, be working remotely. On the retail side, ground floor retail is going to be a very hard deal to come back from. Certainly mom and pop it's going to be an issue because, again, they've had to fill their shelves. They're out a lot of money. They can't sell it. I wonder how many will come back as we continue to move to online purchases. If you look at the contraction in the retail world, it hasn't been in grocery stores. Apparently, everyone in America needs 3 years worth of toilet paper. So we're going out and we're going to do a lot of shopping. And because restaurants are closed, we're actually eating more at home now than we have done in decades. So I see grocery stores changing, not so much, but certainly normal retail, that could be a problem. And certainly malls, and I've been saying this for years, I expect us to lose half of our regional malls within the next 10 years. It could be the next 8 or 7 years now. So I think, again, there's significant adjustments to retail. On the apartment side, well, maybe we'll talk about the apartments in a bit. But that's in essence where I see the commercial office market and the retail market. Lower demand, certainly. You're going to find some companies not making it back, especially those companies that were forced to close down, but at the same time they had to meet their lease obligations. They still had to make those payments. So I think from a landlord perspective, it's going to be equally as hard.
Let's kind of move into this residential side. In fact, I think there's even kind of this tie-in. Let me kind of share it since you've mentioned the apartment space. Obviously, there have been kind of deep safety nets put in place for tenants. Yet to hear a lot for landlords. What impact is that going to have on both commercial as well as residential landlords whose tenants may not want to move out because there's not a lot that can be done to move them out, right? What are your thoughts on that, and how's that going to impact the overall market and real estate market?
Well, certainly, I mean, there's been in many states, and certainly, obviously, I'm here in Seattle, in the city of Seattle, a moratorium on evictions has been put in place. And so, in essence, they're saying, because of what's going on now, you can't throw people out. Now, I have a bit of an issue with that. And the reason being is that if people have been laid off, that it's a very sad scenario, but they are getting a significant amount of money from the federal government, an additional $600 per week for up to 4 months if they've been laid off. So quite frankly, they should be able to pay, if not all their rent, then most of their rent. And here's an interesting little snippet for you. Anyone in Washington state that was making less than $39 per hour working, they are now effectively making more money on unemployment than they were working. Quite unusual situation. Now, the trouble is when you find moratoria set, and I understand that, does that help the landlord? No, it doesn't. Are they being paid? In general, they are, but there's certainly some issues there. However, the city of Seattle now has extended that moratorium through the end of the year. And if you add on that the ban on winter evictions, if you are a renter in the city of Seattle today, you can legitimately not pay your rent until next April. That's scary from a landlord's perspective. So when you start seeing this issue occurring in terms of people not paying their rent, what does that do? That lowers the value of the building itself because you have a thing what's called cap rate decompression. So expectations of value not rising or going down, and there's a real tangible effect to that. So because this scenario of the pandemic and employment has hit renters far harder than homeowners, because 80% of job losses or furloughs have been from renters, not from owners. So if you are a landlord, then certainly you are feeling, I would imagine, a fairly significant amount of concern right now.
Yeah, no doubt. Do you feel like there's going to be a challenge getting people to go back to work when you have so much free money being given to them, right? Maybe they're picking up side work and like really piling on like the income, from where they would have been otherwise, or maybe they're just enjoying Netflix, right? But at some point you have to ask yourself, what's the incentive to get people back to work? Obviously the money shuts off, right? Kind of the free stimulus money shuts off. But is there going to be some long-term ramifications, you think, impact upon people having been out of the workforce for a period of time and not had to work as hard for it or work at all for it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, as you're right, the $600 per week bonus, in essence, does expire in 4 months. So it's not going to go on forever. Will there be some people that don't get back in the workforce? Well, I mean, invariably, there always is. However, given the structure of unemployment in general, I think for most people, they're going to want to. I think I have to look at people in their best face in terms of yeah, I think they're just not going to sit around and watch Netflix or whatever. Certainly they are for the time being. However, my bigger concern is less the fact that they desire to stay on unemployment. They might have to, especially if they are in that tourism or leisure industry. Now, if they are, we are going to see less bars, fewer restaurants. Let's say they work in a hotel. Well, hotels will reopen, but you're going to start seeing some big changes. Front of house staff, they're likely to go away. Everything's going to be online check-in and these kinds of things. So those are people that will be, in essence, displaced. And given their skill set, they might actually, not a case of hanging out because they want to hang out at home and watch Netflix. They might actually, for a while, have no choice until they find another job.
I made the observation, and from 2008, from that downturn, that there were a lot of people. Obviously, companies were forced to let go of a big workforce, and I felt like there was an acceleration of the adoption of automation during that time period because companies were forced to do more with less, and not all those people were hired back, right? Do you foresee this being? It sounds like kind of what you're saying here is that this will actually kind of expedite potentially the kind of rise in popularity of artificial intelligence and automation out of necessity because people are fearful to be in contact with other humans. And so therefore technology will potentially step in and replace some of those jobs, whether it be through online offerings or just even, kind of more automated services in person.
Very, very much so. I mean, technological innovation in the last even in the last few months has been extraordinary. Yeah. I mean, look at us now. I never touched Zoom until about 7 weeks ago. Now I live on the thing. And so without a doubt, it concerns these kind of scenarios when they happen, they breed innovation just by the very nature of it. So I do expect that to happen. Even to a point, this has been going on, this is not news, years old. Amazon have a scenario called Operation Lights Out, which in essence turns all their warehouse distribution into 100% automated. No human beings at all in that space. So without a doubt, I think that you will continue to start seeing technology changing the way we work. I have no doubt about it. It's been doing so for quite some time, but technological innovation is a thing called Moore's Law. It becomes faster and faster. And that is certainly, we are there today, no doubt.
Let's talk a little bit about how all this impacts the residential real estate market, right? My primary audience is that obviously you're with Windermere. So let's talk a little bit about kind of what you see maybe short-term impact of this as well as long-term. What can people expect when it comes to the real estate market? Obviously, kind of my core audience is in Portland, Oregon, although we do stretch across the country. So I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on what we should all plan for.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a couple of things you need to think about straight off the bat. One, this is not 2008. This is not a meltdown in the housing crisis. It's actually far from it. So anyone out there that's thinking, we're back in those terrible days of 12 years ago now, no, we're not. In the same manner that the economy was in good shape in January and February, and it wasn't the economy's fault that this happened, it was a bug. Same thing applies to housing. We went from being remarkably underqualified in the mid-2000s to get a home to being remarkably overqualified. Average down payment on a home sale in 2019 was 16%. Average FICO score in March for a conventional loan was 756. So we are very, very qualified to buy. So it's not a meltdown in that respect. Again, although a lot of people sadly have been furloughed, have been laid off, a vast majority of those are renters, not owners. I'm not saying the ownership housing market is 100% protected, because it's not. Yeah. And I say that because the fact that there's a scenario FHFA put in called forbearance, which meant if you've lost your job temporarily, hopefully, you cannot pay your mortgage for a period of time and you will not be foreclosed upon. I could talk about forbearance for hours, which I know we don't have, but in essence, what I'm trying to say is that we are not in a situation, anything like that we saw, but housing markets across the country do vary dramatically. Up here in Seattle, activity is down by roughly 40%. Yet our offices in Spokane, for example, it's down by less, well, somewhere between 5 and 10. Our offices in Bozeman, Montana, is not down at all. So it does vary remarkably how depending on where in the country you are. Some markets being hit harder than others. Are home prices contracting? No, they're not. The listings are still very, very tight. A lot of people have chosen to wait before listing because they want us to be through this. Yet at the same time, home buyers are out there. They're buying now. The market hasn't stopped, and they're buying, quite frankly, now a lot because there's less competition out there. So that is a good situation to be in. So my short term is the fact that the spring market that was held back will likely come to market. Yeah, we're going to have a summer market, which we normally don't do because of kids and off school and what have you. Our kids are off school till September. We don't care anymore. So if we're going to sell, we're going to sell. And so, but I think as much as we will see more inventory, there will be more demand as well. I think it's still this year, irrespective, it's going to be a tight market. I think it's going to be a home sellers market. However, price growth is certainly going to slow. Is it going to go negative? I don't think so, but we have seen home sellers. We haven't seen an increase, a significant one in the average list price. And so just by the very nature of that, sales price growth, it will continue to rise, but likely at a slower rate. And I've got no problems with that whatsoever. So I think once we reopen the country, transactions are still going to occur in terms of principal primary residences. It can be different in the ultra luxury market. It can be different in the second home market. But I really think that housing is going to lead us out of this. And therefore, anyone involved in residential ownership of housing or real estate, the second half of the year, you've got to find, you've got to be busy. And certainly in Portland and certainly in the Northwest in general.
I love hearing you say that, Matthew, not just because obviously my career and income is tied to the real estate market, but it's an assumption that I've had that you've now grounded with, with kind of deep data and your research and kind of the way that you go about kind of creating these assertions, right, are very numbers based. But I've had a sense as I've observed my own family, as I've observed peers and friends that are outside of the industry, is that the home used to be a place for many that was just kind of a touchdown place, right? It was good enough. You saw a lot of people kind of, again, moving into the city, just having a place, little studio apartments, this and that. And I really feel like people are realizing that the home is no longer just a place to sleep, a place to kind of catch some rest and get back to the social life, that the home is now taking a focal point in everyone's lives like never before. My wife and I are crazy enough to have 6 children. We love them, don't get me wrong. But we never dreamed that we'd be homeschooling them at home, right? In fact, just prior to this episode, I had to laugh because I had a stowaway here in my office. We could hear it, and I had to kick her out before we started the episode. That's not common. But like the concept is that the home used to be a very separate place from school, used to be a very separate place from work. And now those are all being combined together. And so I think a lot of people, as I have conversations with them, at minimum, they're making updates to their home, right? Assuming that they're not impacted by the economy, but people that are not, they're at minimum making updates of not asking themselves a deep question, that oftentimes has become kind of a funny meme of like, do I want to be can I see myself being quarantined here? But it's a reality of like this, I better like this place. I'm going to be forced to stare at these 4 walls for long periods of time. And I think there's going to be movement because a lot of people are deciding like, boy, I never realized my home would need to be all these things. So therefore I need to sell. I need to, either move out of the city, kind of get out and or just get the right footprint for my family, right? For my situation.
Yeah, I mean, you've made a lot of statements. There's a lot to pass, but in essence, what you're saying is right. Several different levels. We have renters, current renters, who are now choosing to become buyers. A lot of millennials, and believe me, millennials will buy more homes in America over the next decade than any other age cohort. Period. That's going to happen. So they're looking to move out of cities and into the suburbs. And again, for 2 reasons. One, they're starting to have families, starting to have real relationships or get married and have children. They're not going to raise them in downtown high-rise apartments. Safety and schooling, very important. But also now, we've got this little COVID-19 bug. So they're looking to move out. I was on a conference call, an earnings call actually, with Toll Brothers a few days ago. They're seeing significant demand in some of their suburban developments, which are targeted to first-time buyers. And they're being flooded, literally, with buyers wanting to get out of apartments. So I think that's going to be a massive component of it. Secondly, as you said, it's like anything else. I've been sat at working for my dining room table now this is week 7. I feel like something out of The Shining right about now. So, but what do we do when we look at anything too much or too frequently? We start picking it apart. And that's what we're doing. So I think it would not surprise me to see some more activity just from people who are already homeowners say, you know what, I mean, my living room's not big enough. I really need a dedicated space for an office or a den. and these kinds of things, or my bathroom's not big enough, whatever it may be. I think you could see some more demand coming from those people who are just getting tired of the house that they have. And if they're not going to make improvements, as you mentioned earlier, they could move as well. So I'm actually excited. I think the market's going to do well. And what we are seeing on the ownership housing side, if there is a niche part of the market, which I'm going to watch very closely, I think we all should, it's going to be condominiums, and it's going to be urban condominiums. We've already seen a slow, you're in Portland, yeah? Am I right? So I've already talking to people, slow down the Pearl District, and so there was a frenetic amount of demand. That seems to have tailed off fairly dramatically. Same thing up here. We were oversupplied, as most markets were, although not so much in Portland, back in the mid-2000s with new condos. And we're not building that many here because it's so expensive to build. I mean, in essence, you've got to sell those units for $1,400 a square foot to make a margin. So how deep is that? But I also think that for those projects that are already up and in existence, I do question the demand scenario. And I say this because we are already seeing it in cities like San Francisco, absolutely in New York, mainly in Manhattan. Condo prices have dropped 20% year over year for the last 2 years. It's a big, big issue there. And I wonder whether that's going to continue just as we decide, the urban thing sounds fun, but if we do fear for our own personal safety, whether we are going to start looking further out.
Yeah, we're going to start looking for more space. I agree. Really, really interesting stuff. What advice would you give to a residential real estate agent right now? It sounds like, based on kind of what we've said here, is keep your eyes up. Like, this isn't a permanent situation. In fact, this may be, and I heard you say, I'm quoting you from earlier, our industry may be the industry that pulls us through, right?
Yeah.
And, to don't miss the opportunity. Of course, be safe, be healthy, right? Don't jeopardize anything. That's more important than business. But of course, like, keep your eye on the fact that there's a whole bunch of people right now that need your leadership, right? They don't understand the market. They don't understand what this all means. And if you could really go out and serve people at a high level, like, they need it right now. They need you to be listening to Matthew Gardner, and they need you to then be taking that and instilling confidence in them that home prices are not going to fall through the floor, right? Obviously, there's some different like types of living arrangements that you've discussed that may be differently impacted, right? But the typical, single family home, there's going to be strong demand for that, especially for first-time home buyers. Anything else that you would kind of add in there that maybe we haven't already said that would be great advice that people can be either internalizing themselves and or sharing with their clients that would be helpful for them moving into this kind of new summer market, if you will?
Right. Well, I think it's several things. One of which is, the house market's not going away. Certainly going to see a slowing down in price growth, that I mentioned. That I'm totally fine with that, because I do fear for affordability. And as much as we see it in Seattle, we have a drive to buy. You do in Portland as well. People living in Salem are working in Portland because that's all they can afford. And so it's the market's is evolving, certainly, but it's not going to go away in terms or spare time maybe than you're used to. Work your database, do your homework, use this time productively to prepare yourself, and certainly get yourself to be in a position to be that trusted advisor to your clients. Because understand the fact that anyone out there, if you're buying a home, then for 98% of the population of America, it's the most expensive thing we will ever buy in our lives. So that's important, and therefore people want to be around people they trust to engage with, to help them in that purchase, and obviously also in the sale as well. So I think that's going to be important. In addition, as I mentioned earlier, first-time buyers, if any of your viewers are not working with them, start. They are going to be a massive component. Now, they're millennials. Millennials do, I'm an old Gen Xer myself, but millennials do things a bit differently. They will use the technology that's out there across the internet, and that's absolutely accurate. However, when it comes to pulling the trigger, a full-service broker is what they want, and you will become their best friend. So figure out how to work with them. And in essence, just be that voice of reason. The housing market is stable. Housing prices aren't going to drop. I just don't see that occurring at all. Price growth will slow, and that's fine. I think it's going to be the slowest rate of appreciation, quite frankly, we've seen since 2012, which is when home prices started kicking into gear again. But use this time productively and obviously do it safely. But I think that the housing market has got, I think, some It's got some legs, and the biggest reason why, and certainly up and down the West Coast, is we're not building enough because land values are so high. And if we're creating owner households, that makes sense. But if we're not building enough, then you get that imbalance between supply and demand. And that puts a lot of onus on existing houses. Therefore, it puts upward price pressure on them. And that's not going to change. It won't change in Oregon. It's not going to change in California. Certainly not in Washington State. So because of that, I think we are going to continue to move. Jobs will be created as we go forward. Yes, we're in a very unique situation today, one that we've never seen before, quite frankly. I'm an academic. I'd love to go and get my to my library and go and get my textbook down on the effect of housing values post-pandemic. No one's written it yet, but I do have 4 friends of mine who have started writing those books. So I'll send you a copy when it gets done. But I think there's use the time productively, learn. Just never stop learning. And I think that's, if you do that, you'll be well set as we move forward once we reopen the country and get through the current situation.
I love that. I believe, to your point, I'm actually reading a book right now, and over he says the impact that one can have by reading 10 pages a day is unbelievable. And I think sometimes we discount that. We don't realize the impact that those simple mundane tasks done repeatedly over time. And I think now's a great time for people to begin to embrace those habits, because more and more now, as we've described earlier, we're living in the knowledge economy. Like, those that have knowledge and can guide and lead people accordingly will be more relevant than ever before. Whereas those that don't may be replaced by automation, right? You may very well find yourself in a spot where algorithms can replace you. Whereas if you continue to learn and grow, as you've said, you're further insulating yourselves against these changes that will come about. So great stuff, Matthew. I want to thank you for your time. My signature question of the show is one that I always love asking, especially to big thinkers like you that are inspiring a lot of people to really see the numbers out there, be the voice of reason, like you said. What would you say if I were to ask you the question, what does a big thinker like you do to continue to be a big thinker, to continue to expand your own possibilities?
Question everything. Let me explain that a little bit. As you mentioned, we are in an information society. There's no doubt about it. Since the internet was created, we've moved into that situation of almost away from knowledge, more into information, because the world is at our fingertips, literally, now. Back in the day when I was at college, which I've had too many years studying, it was all about books. It's what we had. But what we tend to do, and it's a sad indictment, we tend to believe everything we see. Question everything. Look behind it, look through the numbers, look at what's the reason for it. If I was to turn to you and say, you know what, mortgage rate's going to be at 3.1% by the end of this year, a lot of people say, oh, wow, that's great, and leave it at that. But, why are they, what's going to cause that? Question everything, because by questioning, that's how you learn. And I'm very lucky, I teach at the University of Washington as well. And I try and instill all my students with that fact of, yes, I know what I'm saying, and I'm giving you these theories and these ideas, but question me about them. Don't just arbitrarily believe them. And I think if we do that, then when you start questioning, you start digging deeper. And as you dig deeper, you broaden your knowledge base. I think that's going to be remarkably important. I find it remarkable, even though I'm a real estate economist, how many people don't understand mortgages or understand how they work or what they're based upon. They just presume that, I want a mortgage and I go out there and somebody lends me money. It's a little bit more than that. I think that if we start looking deeper at the industry we're in, and certainly with real estate, because real estate has evolved dramatically. It used to be kind of essentially a part-time gig back in the 1940s and 50s. Now it's not. And I think that we need to continue to evolve our knowledge and our professionalism within the real estate industry in general, not just on sales, but on title, insurance, appraisals, et cetera, et cetera. I think we need to do that. It's going to be very important because we're talking about a $30 trillion economy. I say that's the value of every home in America together. It's about $30 trillion. It's not chump change. It's very, very significant. So question everything, believe nothing.
I love it. Such great insight. Matthew, thank you so much for coming on today, for being willing to share and impart of your knowledge and wisdom to help a whole bunch of real estate professionals that really want to serve their clients at the highest levels, and at the core are driven by really wanting to build that kind of business without having to sacrifice everything else, right? So thank you for being that for us today. Look forward to getting you out in front, even doing our part to help more people know about you. So thank you for what you've done.
That's very kind.
My final request of everybody listening today are 3 simple words, and they are go think bigger. Thank you so much, Matthew, for coming on today. It's been a total pleasure, my friend.
Justin, great pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
You bet, my friend.